Hey, this is a good moment. I'm sitting down with Jenny Ray LaRue, who just recently was in the governor's race for the state of California, and her campaign manager. I'm not sure if that's the correct title, Matt Plummer. What would be the actual title, Matt?
Deputy campaign manager. Yeah,
There it is.
close.
I nailed it, just like that. And I'm really excited to be sitting down with these two. I feel like they have so much to share from that journey. How old is this journey? So we the recall for Governor Newsom did not go through about how long ago?
Yeah. So we're recording this in early November 2021. The election was September 14th, 2021. The recall qualified around March 15th, and then there were a couple of other procedural steps after that. And so, really, it's not a very old journey. This is a pretty new process, and certainly for Matt, I know that he's had a focus on government. For me, I've been so proud of myself for successfully voting every election. I really was basically voting so I could complain. But this was certainly a new journey for both of us to really dive into the fray of running for office. And gosh, we learned so much, had such a great time, and have a lot to share. So excited to dive into that today.
The journey is very fresh. So how are you guys doing post the run? Just real briefly from both of you, how are you? Are you fully decompressed? Are you still in the throes of that utter madness? It must have just been such a journey.
Well, I think I'll speak for myself, and then Matt can speak for himself. I, put a lot of the pieces of my life on hold. I hired another CEO to run my business. We spun up a new organization to manage this, and there's nothing quite like an election. Normally, if you're selling products or services, you're selling them and delivering them kind of in, circular motion. But in this situation, it's kind of like one day, the big dance, and then it's all either over and you're the governor or you're not. And so what was unusual for me is that I felt just this unusual sense of peace throughout that process. And I think part of that is that we got blasted, our capacity got expanded so rapidly during the process that we were ready to maintain that sense of momentum for a really long period of time. And so for me, there wasn't a personal crash. There wasn't a unwinding. I felt really proud of the things that we said, the people that supported us, the team that we built statewide and nationwide, the way that we ran our campaign, even course corrections that we made. And I felt like I was able to look anybody in the eye and say, I'm really proud of what I did out there. And that made all the difference for me. So I've taken some time just to kind of reconnect with my family, driving my husband absolutely crazy, being at home and trying to reorganize our household 6 times over. And then just, really praying into and thinking about what the next steps are. Yeah. Matt, what about you?
I will say before Matt answers, I was able to be at a few functions where you spoke and you shared your journey, shared your platform, talked about your focus on what you would be doing if you were to get that office, and thoroughly impressed, created so much hope in me as somebody who lives in California, as a citizen of the state, and is, navigating the issues of this unique state that we live in. And I felt like being exposed to your leadership was not only inspiring, but very renewing in terms of hope for the process, and hope that there are people in positions of power that can affect change and really want to do a good job with that role. And so, just props back to you. I think everything you've shared about, hey, you feel proud about what you did. We're so proud of you.
Thank you, Lance. Yeah, I mean, one of my stated goals and prayers, and my team held me to this, Matt, called me the carpet on it at least once, was that I wanted to use this time to fully prepare to step directly into the office. Yep. So I basically just said, hey, God, leave nothing unturned in me. If there's something that will not enable me to lead well in this new realm, don't let it continue. And I'm grateful to my team and just to the process to openly submitting to being in that growth process throughout the time, so that I was ready to go. Beautiful. So yeah, Matt, what about you? What were your...
Matt, how are you doing post-election?
Yeah. So I think when the election ended, I expected, and even, I was talking with my wife afterward, and she expected me to be like, okay, I need to take some time off, not do anything. And actually in that moment, I had the opposite response. It kind of felt like the work was just beginning. And so I was like, okay, like now I know a lot more than I did 6-7 months ago. And so I need to like do something with this knowledge and get, take the next step. And so I actually jumped into 2 other things related to, kind of in the political governmental space. And so now I'm feeling a little bit like it probably would have been a good idea to have a little bit of a rest there. But that being said, I still felt very energized by being part of this. And, like you mentioned earlier, like our eyes were kind of open to like, okay, there's really opportunities for change here. And there are, to use a biblical phrase, the workers are few in a sense, and that there's a lot of gaps in what needs to happen and what needs to be built, and not enough people who are doing that. And so feeling a sense of urgency of like, okay, we might not see change overnight, but we need to keep our hands on the plow, so to speak, and keep going. And so I kind of have a mix of both of those feelings, looking forward to the holidays to kind of take a true rest, but excited about what's happening now and the opportunity to be part of building something continuing forward.
It's great. I want to talk about that. I think that's a really important story. How did this happen? How did you guys get involved in running for governor level leadership in the state of California? And I realize that we could spend an hour and a half answering that, but I want to maybe make this 20% and 80% of what you've learned. So.
Love it. Well, I can share first because, as I mentioned earlier, this wasn't a part of my life plan, wasn't on the bucket list. Really satisfied to allow government to be government and my realm, which is business, to be business. And so, a lot of the things that I have been learning in the business realm were absolutely direct preparation for this, but I didn't know it. And so the first thing that I did, my first great mistake that I made, was saying yes to whatever God's asking me to do. So every time he would say, do this, right? Buy this business, move to this obscure place, Redding, California, stay in this obscure place when you think that you want to leave, just obediently walking out what the next thing was. That was the first thing. And so when God, put this before me, it was, I'd already had the track record with him to know that saying yes is the best possible thing and the only right way forward. I think I also understood how to lead and had stepped progressively into leadership positions and really grasped those with my whole heart. And so I'd taken them on behalf of other people. I learned how to steward other organizations. And then, once I had my own, I then bought the company out from a person that I was working with, I felt like I would just progressively, really eagerly step into those new realms of leadership and learn, all the lessons, leave nothing unturned. So for me, it was a lifetime of preparation to get ready for a big yes, and really ultimately. 2 pivotal things happened for me. One was during COVID in 2020, I kind of woke up to the fact that there is no business and government. Kind of we're all in the same, we're all in the same, state operating together, and there's interactions between the two that are really inextricable. So understanding how tied together what government does is to success in the business world and vice versa, that was really, really eye-opening to me. As a sub portion of that, Governor Newsom, when he closed down schools and then kept them closed, that really adversely affected the school that my kids are a part of. Not our family directly, because we're very privileged. We had 2 working parents with flexible jobs that could totally hang out with our kids at home. But our school is over 60% low income, mostly single parent households, and watching how government policy directly affects the lower income households in our state, and feeling, anger and like kind of the unholiness of the direct impact of government action for political gain that is not for the best of people. I really felt the conflict there, and felt like there has to be some way that's doing this. And then I began to go through a personal conviction process that my generation, I'm in my early 40s, has basically given up on government leadership as an act of service. We viewed it as a career instead of as a place to lay down our lives. And so we look at it as a career, and we're like, heck no. I can think of other places where I am properly valued, where I'm properly compensated, where my trajectory is right. And public service is really not designed that way to be a career. It was designed to be a season of life for people who are contributors in other ways. And I just took a fresh look at it, and I said, oh my gosh, I and my whole generation have given up on this. And that's why the people that are leading are in power. And so who is going to step up? And I started saying, I'd write a check, I'd get involved. I wonder who this person is that I'm going to support. And so those kind of, crises moments for me really crystallized what needed to change. And then ultimately God said, hey, would you do it? And ultimately his question to me was, I basically said back to him, if I do this, I'll lose everything that I've built. I have a successful business, a peaceful, quiet life, all of which, fulfilled the bucket list at the age of 40. Right. And I said, if I do this, I'm going to lose everything. And you gave it to me, and he said, yeah, you will. That's what it takes to become a public servant. And so to that, I said, yes. That was how I got to where I was.
Wow. And Matt, it sounds like your eyes have opened on a whole nother level, and like you're still wanting to stay engaged there. Not that Jenny isn't, but how'd the process start for you? Was it Jenny just interrupting your journey, or were you already feeling some kind of pull to get into this government space?
Yeah, I mean, and for those listening who I know are into, having an impact on society, that was where my background had come from. I'd spent a number of years doing strategy consulting at a place called the Bridgespan Group that works with nonprofits and foundations and philanthropy. Okay. And during that time, really the question that animated me was, how do we have the most impact on society? How do we do the most good and have the most impact? And for a while, for me, that was advising these leading NGOs and nonprofits. And then I began to have these thoughts and see that government policy actually was having a huge impact on how people's lives unfolded. And I began to wonder, okay, is government a key vector for how we have impact, and even perhaps in some cases, a more powerful vector than what I was doing previously? And that journey had started and got me learning. And, I think probably like a lot of people, I just went down the educational journey of beginning to listen to podcasts and read articles. And it wasn't until the beginning of 2021 when I was actually talking to God about what are my goals for this year. And I felt like he had said, do something in politics. Like it can be small, it can be like, and
famous last words.
Yeah. Favorite line was, he was like, just dip your toe in the water. And so I thought I was just going to dip my toe in the water, like volunteer and take phone calls at, with local assemblywoman. And then got connected with Jenny Ray. And there was a number of coincidences that happened that kind of, we knew each other previously. And then I had been coaching her son's basketball team with my daughter, with her husband as the assistant coach. And so it all kind of converged. It was a divine setup. And at first I was just going to write like a one-page policy brief on a topic, which I was like, oh, I can do that. I can fit that into, do it some evening. And then that quickly turned into a more than full-time job, I would call it. And so, but I think it's, just to come back to the original piece, is the idea of that government can impact our lives and has an impact on society. I think that proved out for me as I got deeper into understanding the policies. Also, I think, it'd be hard for anyone now, 18 months post-COVID or whatever it is, to believe that government doesn't have a powerful impact on our lives. And so I am continue to be passionate about that because I see that as an ongoing place for us to have impact on society and make society a better place.
It's great. It's beautiful. So let's talk about the learning journey. So I think there's a couple areas I would like to get into, like what you guys are walking away with as leaders, you've learned personally as a leader. Secondly, just the realm of like state level issues, like you campaigning and building a platform, like you have got to know more about the things that are actually affecting our lives as California citizens. I feel like I have this level of knowledge about issues. You guys probably went pretty deep.
We did, yeah. Well, as Matt mentioned, we really we did a deep dive on policy. Both Matt and I think really enjoy the policy side, and we had an amazing policy team that supported us as well. I really focused the campaign and am continuing to focus the conversation in California on what I believe are the big kitchen table issues.
Yeah.
Is it good to live in California? Is it good to work in California? Can we breathe in California? And so, under Live, we really did a deep dive on education, on public safety, and our real focus in that whole sector in the kind of Live area was, what is the role of good government? And we really defined good government as a government that it makes it possible to build affordable housing through the private markets, not through government regulation, that makes it available to have the best educational options in the country. And I believe that both in California and nationwide, we really need an overhaul in the way that we think about education to move into this century and prepare the workforce of the future. I think we're behind world, models of ways that we could do that more effectively. And we also, just really talked about public safety, about how, like, in general, there's a degrading sense of personal safety and property safety in California that comes from changes to our criminal justice system. We talked about work. California is generally ranked in the bottom 1 or 2 of work-friendly states. And so what does it look like in a traditional transforming sense when businesses are now able to hire people remotely, deliver services remotely? Can California maintain its competitiveness? And we are seeing this massive exodus out of our state, which I think answers the question of, hey, we've built structural barriers to business success in our state, and when people are withdrawn from all of the other connectivity that they have in the state, they'll choose to move somewhere else. So, we had developed a really solid plan to change that trajectory and to make California investable and a really premier business destination again. And the final one is Breathe. This one was a little bit, non-traditional, but it was talking about some of what we believe to be the natural resource and environmental constraints. And I'm a Republican, so in that vein, this was a little bit of an unusual part of our category, but it's very California focused. And so we talked about water, and just as a highlight for that, realizing that there's the water equation in California is different than you might expect. It's not how much rain falls, is how much people get. It's how much rain falls, times the percentage of it that we store and use for different uses. And that's highly politicized. And there's been, I think, some really poor water management choices made in recent years that have affected that. And the news does not capture the real focus on what would fix the water problem, right? So we focus on the word drought, which is tied to our water problem, and there's this whole piece in between, the water management piece, that's really critical. How we store water, how we convey water, where we get our water from. Does it come from rain or from the ocean or from other places? And so, all of that is really a big part of the water equation. We also talked about power. We have a real power crisis in California. Power is increasingly expensive, kind of dangerous. It starts wildfires a lot of the time, and our power, is headed toward power going offline for other environmental factors. And so we're headed toward a bigger power crisis. And so, we talked about these kind of bigger environmental issues related to fire and forest management, power and water. And really what we recognized is that a lot of people view that as a black box. So there was a big educational piece to help people just very plainly understand, here's where your water comes from, and here's how we can get more of it at affordable rates. Here's where your power comes from, and here's how we can get it at affordable rates. Here's how we can stop our forests from burning. And it's not what the media says, it's something a little different. So like, let's make sure that we're maintaining a focus on education there.
Matt, I mean, a lot of issues there, maybe one or two that you'd like to highlight, like, wow, I learned a ton. Because I think you could give us long-winded answers about all those.
Yeah, and maybe one general point that I would make is I think I went through a journey of being, say in college, in my early years out of college, knowing next to nothing about policy of these issues or any other issues. And then increasingly feeling like, oh, I kind of feel like I have an opinion on these things just from reading, regular news articles, listening to this or that. And once I got into the campaign, I realized, okay, my level of knowledge, which I was fairly confident in, was like very high level. And the difference between what it takes to actually solve problems through government and what I was aware of, like as the solution, vastly different. And just an encouragement to people as you think about advocating or interacting with government. If you're like, oh yeah, I definitely have like a really strong opinion about this. Well, it's probably a lot more complicated than you think it is, and it probably takes a lot more nuance to figure out how to execute that. And one example I'd give is around wildfire prevention. And one of the things that I think on the surface, it sounds like, well, we just need to like thin out our forests. And that is completely true. But then when you get to like, well, how would we execute that? The first thing you run into is the fact that a large portion, I think it's in the neighborhood of 2/3 to 3/4 of our forests are federal land. And so the state doesn't have jurisdiction over that land. And so as governor, for example, you don't necessarily have the ability to just say, okay, we're going to clear a bunch of those forests. And then even for the land where you can manage, and there's a number of issues around like the steepness of terrain and what that means for your ability to do controlled burns. There are other type of clearing. And so that's just one example of the fact that like at this high level, you're like, yes, here's the great idea. But then there's still so much work you need to do to figure out what does it take to actually implement good policy. And I think what we learned also is that it's very easy to implement policy that will appear to have good consequences without considering the second order consequences. And so we saw that in some of the criminal justice things where it was like, okay, our state prisons are too full in California. So let's raise the bar for what it takes to get someone into prison. But then there are second order consequences to that. And we see, a number of retail stores, Walmart, Walgreens, moving their stores out of California because it's no longer, safe for them to operate here, and they're getting shoplifted continually. And so just encourage people to consider the complexity, whether it's going down more detail into practical implementation or considering the fact of what are the second order consequences. If we make that decision, it creates that effect. What will be the effect of that effect?
Have you guys seen anything there? Like as you're campaigning, you don't get to the point where you're like working on these problems. You're just in the point of like trying to articulate the problems and, potential solutions to those problems. Do you recognize a natural ability for those leaders to cooperate and collaborate? Is it more common in the government space for like infighting? And because I would like back to the forest management example, it's like, well, if you don't have cooperation with the federal government, you're not going to get anywhere. Yeah. I feel like as a leader, that's just like a baseline level of leadership. Like I have to work well with others. Anything to say there?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is one of the reasons why I think oftentimes business people are favored for positions of executive leadership like this, because we're used to taking multiple stakeholders, operations and marketing and different stakeholders that all kind of want different things, and they all need budget and they all want to get things done, and you're kind of corral them into a place where everybody looks good and everybody wins. And the challenge with that is that there's no profit motivation in government. There's this kind of like intangible political sustainability or the duration of your career. There's other things that are the metrics of that. So we talked a lot in the campaign about just the tools that the governor has and how we would get things done. And so we actually mapped each one of our policy initiatives to the how, so that we could explain to people, like, this one would be through executive order, this one would be through administrative management and inside this organization, this one would be through staffing, so we would hire somebody to lead this inside this division. And we actually got very tactical to explain how that went. And so we felt like for our own our own ability to look people in the eye and say, yeah, this is doable, to bring tangible hope to the state, we needed to be able to, actively explain how each one of these things would get done. And so for the wildfires, for example, we determined that there were some things that would be by executive order, some that were budgetary, some that were collaboration, some that would be legal, right? And we kind of like actually sub-mapped each one of the activities to the place where we would need to move to get them done.
That's great. And so on that level, like, let's start talking leadership lessons, maybe things you walk away with as a leader. And we're all in development, we're all on our journey, we're all learning the things we're learning. But I feel like at some level, you guys had access to learning some pretty unique things running for this level of leadership. What do you want to talk about there?
I'll talk about one of them. It was something that somebody called out in me. They reminded me of something that I had said on a call, a year or two before announcing my run for office. I had said that I was unoffendable.
Okay.
And one of the things that they said was, that's exactly what we need in government right now. Somebody who is able to operate without offense. And let me tell you, that was tested pretty much every day, if not multiple times a day, because we give license to speak poorly, terribly, with curses and awful stuff toward our political leaders. It's like we treat them as though they are the scum of the earth. And so, and people do that to your face when you're running for office, when you're reaching out to them. I mean, the kinds of things that they write are so unnecessarily damaging and harsh that if you're easily offended, it's too easy to get swayed by public opinion, because you navigate yourself to a place where you want to be liked. And so I really had to be the adult in the room a number of times, saying, like, I know that you're mad about that, but this is not the way that we're going to get this done. And I had to kind of push back and correct, and also maintain a lack of offense, whether I was working with my own team or with the other team, right? Just to kind of keep those conversational lines open, and to let people know I would cut off no relationships because of my personal offense. And so that I would say was a leadership skill that I began with. However, I was not ready to exercise it at this level, and I got a lot of practice doing that.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds intense. And back to
I would reinforce that as one of the people who is reading our incoming hate mail, which did come, especially when we sent emails to a broader list of people that weren't as familiar with Jenny Ray or didn't know her at all. The accent I would add to that is to be able to disagree with people while respecting them. And
Matt, tell that one story about the guy that I feel like that's so powerful as an anecdote.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the challenges I would say is that, some people would respond to whatever, it could be one word on the website or something Jenny Ray had said somewhere else, or something they had heard on the news that might be, and respond with such anger. And sometimes I would choose not to engage and just be like, okay, we're moving on. But a lot of times I actually felt like it was important to engage with people and have that conversation. And one time it started off really angry, nasty, something along the lines of probably with some profanities, but like, I would never vote for someone who says da 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 da, and who has those views. Like, those views are like criminal, or like hatred towards our children or whatever. And so I just began to engage them, and we had a text message thread of probably like 30 to 40 texts going back and forth. And it was like, if you looked at the transgression or progression,
transgression,
there were such but progression is what I meant to say, was in the text thread, it went from like very nasty and kind of just throwing personal insults to over time being very thoughtful and contemplative. And at the end, you know, we got to a place where we still disagreed on the actual policy, but you know, I said, you know, it looks like we disagree on this, but I appreciate you taking the time to spell out your thinking on this. And I can tell you've thought deeply about this and cared deeply about these issues and about the people affected by it. And just said, you know, we need more of this in our state and our country. And they responded and said, you know, this was actually really edifying and I really appreciate it. And I'm surprised by, you know, this level of conversation that you chose to engage in it. And so that was, and that happened a few times, but that, you know, that's what we need to be able to do as leaders, is to, as Jenny Ray said, not just kind of submit to what people want because they're being mean to us or yelling it, but also be able to have that conversation and handle disagreement and difficulty and navigate that without disrespecting people, and being able to come to the end of a conversation that's been very heated over very important issues that affect millions of people's lives, and come and be like, okay, we disagree, but we feel better about having had that conversation and feel like we have a better relationship because of that.
And I'll just give one really crystal clear example. You know, we really wanted to, the role of governor is a role of the people. You're hired by and voted in by the people, but you're an executive. So you're not given sway to everything that they think. But it became really increasingly clear during our election that COVID and COVID management was going to become a really critical issue. And we spent most of our time talking about what we wouldn't do, what that Newsom had done. And then there were a few people that were, you know, independents or outside of our party that really challenged us to say, look, we think Newsom's plan is very clear. Can you come up with an equally clear plan for how you would get done what you're going to do? And what we realized is that what they were hearing from the media and from even our messaging was that we had a no plan, like for COVID. And this is one of the major errors I think that a lot of Republicans have related to COVID, is that it doesn't appear as though we have a COVID management plan. It appears as though there's a Democrat COVID management plan and a Republican non-COVID management plan. And so we received that challenge and really internalized it and came away as a team and said, great, what is our COVID plan? That's a fair challenge and in a truly like bipartisan agreement on something like this. We would have to acknowledge how important it is for people who are really deeply afraid of COVID to have a management plan. And so we came out with, I really believe, the nation's first pioneering, data-oriented, medically sound, COVID management plan that would save more lives than Gavin Newsom. And up until that point, we were just kind of responding instead of taking ownership over hearing people's deep concerns and coming up with actual solutions for that. And when we were able to do that, we really felt a pivotal shift inside the campaign.
Nice. That's beautiful. I mean, it all comes back to this idea of collaboration, cooperation, mutual respect for each other, staying together. And I think that energy in the land right now is so about pulling us apart and like almost eroding a sense of hope and a sense of promise for the future of California. It almost feels like this, like, I don't know, I just walk away from the process feeling discouraged. And when I'm hearing you guys talk, it's like, no, the emphasis is we can get it done. The emphasis is like, we need everybody, like, let's stay on task. What is your guys' hope for the state? And maybe even looking ahead, like any takeaways as you think about your future, whether in or out of the government space?
Oh, okay. Let me do this one. I want to go first. I've got some, I will 100% remain involved. I may run again. I may run again immediately. I may run again in the later future. But there's no question that, like Matt said, that this was an energizing experience, and we became more convicted of the urgency and importance of it right now. That these are the kind that we are the kind of leaders that we might just need right now, and therefore it's our responsibility to keep laying down our lives to do it. So I felt that super deeply, and I will do all of the above. If somebody's interested in running for office, I'll write checks. I will I'll connect them with people. I'll give advice. I'll help them in any way that I can, because I really think that if we have a culture where everybody is celebrating celebrated for just the choice of laying down their life in public service, we're going to see some shift in that. And I felt that we were the beneficiaries of a little bit of that, and I would just love to see that magnified. In addition, I think that, I think personalizing the opposition is a really helpful way to do it. So I have a cousin who's a congresswoman who's a Democrat. And so anytime I would think about going, hate mail on a Dem, or calling them things like the liberal left or the radical left, I would picture her face. And just like I love her, and she has 3 kids, and I admire who she is and what she stands for. And we disagree on some of the policy platforms, but I don't hate her, and I never will. And so, remembering the personalization of the people that are on the other side of the conversation, I think it was and is a really critical piece that we want to continue to bring to the conversation. And that's what California can do for the country, because we have, 46% Democrat, 24% Republican, 24% independent. We have this massive independent group that says, I'm not right or left. Sway me, move me based on who you are and what you will do. And I think that California is kind of a call to action for the country based on that right now. And I was so encouraged by the people who are deeply motivated to do and get behind the right thing. And I think that there are major progressions that we can make in California to lead the way for that nationwide, to really speak to the middle, to stay in the middle, but not to be in a place of constant compromise, right? Negotiation and compromise are different. Negotiation is where I get some of what I want, you get some of you want, and compromise is where nobody gets what they want. And so I think that California can lead the way in that negotiation, where there's more balance in the conversation, and a lot of people get what they want. And that's what I believe we can bring in my generation, and the people that have been out of this, that are coming into this sphere right now. I believe that we can bring that ability to do that, not to compromise, but at the same time, to figure out a way that everybody gets what they're looking for. That's
beautiful. Matt, how about you? How would you answer that question? Just your hope as you're looking ahead, even thoughts of future investment in the government landscape, political landscape?
Yeah, I think I would say 2 things to people who are listening and thinking about this. One is that I think some people, and I encounter them definitely weekly, if not daily, look at the system of government, look at the rhetoric around government, and they say, it's so broken, I don't want to go anywhere near it. And what I would encourage you to do is that's why you need to step into it. It's that exact reason that you need to get involved. And that's, don't abandon the system, but get involved and help reform the system is what I would encourage. And then the other piece is, a lot of people, and Jenny Ray and I were in a meeting a few weeks ago, and we were talking about kind of building for the long term. And the person was like, what's the use of this? It's going to be this way, And what I'd encourage people is persistence. It's not, if you have this vision of what California can be in solving these problems, or whatever your vision might be of the impact that you hope to have on society. And, Lance, I know you've learned this in all the amazing things that you do, is that it's not that change is going to happen overnight, but you have to be willing to commit to the process of building. And that's kind of what I'm doing now. A friend of mine decided to run for city council. And so I'm going to be managing his campaign here in Reading, excited about what he, can offer the city of Reading. And then I'm working on a ballot measure around school choice, which we're aiming to get enough signatures to get on the ballot for November 2022. And there, my focus and part of that is just building the local infrastructure of people who are active and want to give an hour a week. It can be or more, there's always room for more, but an hour a week to say, I want to be part of this system and part of the influence and impact that government has on our world. And so that's what I'm doing now, is just learning how does that work and helping organize people to, on these 2 specific things, but with the hope that that can be mobilized for other things going forward.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I think there'd be people listening to this that would ask, how do I show up? How do I engage in the political space? Or maybe they're feeling a sense of passion or urgency, but they're like, what do I do? What would you encourage people to do whatever space they're on in that continuum. Like maybe they've just ran for the state level leadership, or, maybe they know nothing.
Yeah, I would just start with some of the lessons of we saw amazing models kind of around the state. One church recommends that their people get involved in every single election, working on any campaign.
Okay.
I loved that. It was a very kind of like non-political way to get involved in government, because they encourage them to get involved across the aisle, and they just encourage people to really understand. So, we had constant calls for volunteers to knock doors, to put up signs, to organize fundraising events, and just getting involved in volunteering and stuff that's already happening is really a good entry level way to get a very real idea of what it takes to operate in this space. And then the second would be to give, financially. I think I never considered political giving as a actual valid use of my funds. And I'm Ivy League trained. I have a successful business. My family and I live on a ranch. It wasn't that we couldn't give. It was just like we never made a connection to any value to give our money there. But I now want to give out of honor for people that want to lay down their lives. I want to give to their campaigns. And so I think that's a second thing, just like carry that revelation that those people are offering to lay down their lives for you, and give them something to go and support that. And small gifts and big gifts all are like, watching those come in means something to the candidate, speaking from that perspective. So if you give $5 or $10, it means something to the candidate that you took the time to fill in that information. And then the third is run. And I think like I sat in a church planting seminar ages ago in an old church that I was a part of, and they said that their attitude towards church planting was, you're either planting or you're getting ready to plant. Like you either, you sit on the front row, but there's no back row people in a church. And they had this very kind of church planting mentality, and we're a very successful church planting organization. And I think we should actually think the same way about running. Like I now teach my kids, it's not a matter of if, but when they're going to run for office, right? It's not a matter of only when, but which one are they going to run for? And we've lost that for a season. I think a constant conversation and expectation that if you're in leadership, government will be a part of that for you. And we really need to bring that back and begin that conversation. Great. When are you going to run for office? When are you going to run for office? And set the bar higher than just voting, really getting involved, I think is the key. Matt, would you add anything to that?
I love it. Can you guys speak? We got to wrap this up soon,
okay.
But I would love for you guys to speak to that sense of despair that's so rampant in our generation, where we're like, no, honestly, you guys have both addressed it to a degree, but as we're talking about people engaging, that probably one of the bigger obstacles is like, man, I can't make a difference there, and I don't want to make a difference there. It's so broken.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I mean, I'll carry this one, and then Matt, you can jump in too. But I felt responsible to maintain an irrational level of hope. And the way that I fueled that was to continue to go back to the drawing board and say, can this be done? I don't care how hard it is. I care if it's possible or not. And so we would go back and, is it possible to manage our forests? The answer is yes. Is it possible to fix the water problems in California? The answer is yes. Could we have world-class education? The answer is yes. And then you go through all the but issues. But we had to remain focused on what our target and what our goal was, not on how hard it is to fix them, but on whether or not it's possible. And then from there, the question is, are there enough resources? Do we have enough money? Are there the right people? And then we begin to deploy people and ideas and new technologies that are emerging to solve these problems. And so I just want to let you guys know, I come back from the front lines with a good report. California is on the move. We have stuff to offer. It's a winnable state for a conservative, but not the old way. California demands, as part of our nature and our charter, that things must be done new here. Okay. And so we got to renew our minds around what that looks like, so that we don't use old patterns and try to, push them into this really creative, demanding, and high expectation environment.
I love it. Matt, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just add two things quickly. One is that oftentimes when we think about the political space, we think of it in a binary fashion. You either win an election or you lose an election. You either win that policy, measure and gets passed as a bill, or it doesn't. But in reality, there's a whole spectrum on which there are victories that happen that don't get seen and don't get talked about. And even, if we think back to our campaign, the thousands of people who have a different vision for California, who invested in a different vision. I mean, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that were invested in Jenny Ray's campaign. And there's also, I was at this conference recently and they were talking about how even just, how many seats are uncontested, meaning that the person who was in that seat, political seat, no one runs against them, and so they just stay. And what that means is that any money they raise, they can give to other candidates who need it. And so if you don't agree with the decisions that person's making, even just running and requiring them to spend money to campaign against someone else is a victory, even if you lose 80% to 20%, in the sense that you cause them to invest their funds in their community. And so just want to encourage you, you don't have to win. You don't have to be like, oh, I can win this race in order for it to be worth it. There's a whole spectrum of things that make a difference. And then the last thing I'd say is that, when we think about the big political victories and social victories of even the last, century, they happened over the span of years, decades, some even centuries long. And so now is the time to do the work so that we can see and reap the victories 10 years from now. And just to encourage people to expand their vision and have a long-term point of view and see, okay, even if I don't see victory tomorrow, I'm building something that will enable victory 10 years from now. And that's what we feel like, we were part of in this election, is building something for the future.
It's great. You guys have it. You embody our mantra, get involved. The world is run by those who show up. You guys are invested. You're doing it. And I love the hope that you guys are carrying, I love the insight you guys are offering and sharing. I'm excited for both of you to continue to have influence and leadership in the government landscape. I think there's a need. And you're kind of pulling on me here. You're drawing me in because that is the right answer, isn't it? It's not like, well, I'm so discouraged, I'm going to turn away. It's like, oh, I'm so discouraged, I got to get in the mix.
Yeah. Yeah.
You guys are inspiring us.
Lance, I have to. I gotta, yeah, I know. Matt'll send you a text right after this. That's exactly what Matt's problem was. He was like, I can do one policy brief, and then all of a sudden he was running a statewide campaign. Look, I'll just want to give a couple exhortations for how people can get involved. First of all, if you're young, get involved in politics early. It's an incredible networking opportunity. I mean, you get to meet these people who are movers and shakers of business and society, and in ways that you are like don't deserve, when you're young in your career. And so the access to the halls of power is pretty profound, actually, from even a volunteer's perspective. So I think that the people that volunteered on our campaign were smart and strategic with their own life. There's a lot that you can get out of it, not just making this like broader change, but actually just personally. Also, Matt and I think both of us have young kids that are 10 and under. And we really felt there was like a generational shift in our kids. So Matt's girls have my bumper stickers on their little Tykes car, and so they know what it's like to decorate for a woman who's running for office. And my kids, I asked them at one point where they wanted to live when they were older, and my son said he wants to live in the governor's house in California. And I think sometimes we even ignore, like, because Matt and I want to win. I mean, Matt wants that ballot measure to pass, and I want to win the next election that I'm a part of. It's not like something where we're just willing to die for the next 40 years. Like, we do want to win it. We want to win it now. But there is something happening that's profound that will change a generation. And that's another reason to get involved.
That's good. Any way people can connect with you guys that you want to share on this platform?
Yeah, I mean, our website, email, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, et cetera, are all active. And so we can send over the links for that to you, Lance, to put those in the show notes. But you can really reach out to us just about any way. We have a really quick response time and we love connecting. And so if you're interested in getting involved with what we're building for the future and also asking questions or need support in your run, please do reach out for us.
And those Facebook pages and whatnot, is that just Jenny Ray LaRoux?
Yep. So Jenny Ray LaRoux, and so it's all of the right, every single platform that you can imagine, we're on there. And so if you find me there, that's where I'm hanging out.
And for you, Matt, with especially with that ballot measure you're trying to get signatures for, how do people connect with you?
Yeah, if you want to find out more about that specifically, you can go to californiaschoolchoice.org, and you can find me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, at the handle Matt Plummer USA. So feel free to send me a message if you want to get specifically involved in that or just want to connect and talk.
Great. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I feel like so much more to talk about, but this has been really inspiring, super informative. Jenny, Matt, thank you for your time. You guys have a good rest of your afternoon. I'm going to officially say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lance. Thanks for having us.